I want to tell you a story. And it's not a story that's been told. A story about rock and roll. Which is why you come here. Since I've been doing this YouTube... Did you like that pause then? That was cool, wasn't it? I'll do that again. You see, the other YouTubers would cut that out. You know those ones that just keep jerking, they keep going backwards and forwards like that. I don't do that. I use pauses. Pregnant pauses. In my time as a YouTuber, I have had to consider who the best bands are, who the worst bands are, look at history, think about it in different ways, try and find a different angle, try and work out why things that don't quite make sense, to get another angle, then say, oh, well, yeah, this does make sense. And one of the things that's always interested me is the Beatles, because the Beatles are not like the Rolling Stones or the Small Faces or Led Zeppelin or King Crimson or Pink Floyd or Black Sabbath or Deep Purple or Lynyrd Skynyrd or ZZ Top. Yeah, they're a rock band, yeah, but they're not quite a rock band, are they? What are they like? What are the Beatles like? What are they like? Well, let's examine what they are, because they're actually quite unique, and that's what's wonderful about them. There's a uniqueness to the Beatles, and there was a time when that uniqueness was desired by the whole world and everybody loved it. And if you could try and work out what that was, because it was more than just the songs, even though they were brilliant songwriters, but it's hard to actually decide how great they were, because great pop songwriting is almost defined by them. And when we go to some of those early records like Love Me Do, is it great songwriting, or is it just the fact that the Beatles made a pop song and it was quite a good pop song, but it's gone into the lexicon and history, and now that's the yardstick by which we measure good pop songs? These are the sort of things I worry about when I'm trying to get off to sleep at night. I don't know if you worry about them, but there's something about the Beatles what's brilliant about them troubles me, because it is so unique to them and it was so loved and it took the world over. Everybody loved it, and then they started to change. And people who are more sophisticated, people who think they know about music, they love the change. They start to get all this studio experimentation. They take drugs and it goes all weird and hippified. They almost define that, don't they? And there's a journey to that, from that sort of cheeky Liverpudlian pop that they made in the early days, sort of this sort of new English, beat band that is like aping, American music, but throwing a few weird influences in there that everyone seems to love. They then walk the way through. They invent the album. They invent, concept albums, multi-track recording, psychedelia, all these sort of things they do, and it's an incredible thing. And so when you put on Help, Rubber Soul, Revolver, Sgt. Pepper, all that run up into there, it's like mind blowing. By the time they get to 1970, though, they're like, they got Phil Spector in there, Let It Be, Abbey Road is a great album, without a doubt. It's probably their greatest album. But there seems to be some sort of dissent there. The Band of Brothers no longer is a band of brothers. Now, we can pinpoint this at the Sgt. Pepper Lonely Hearts Club Band, because the Sgt. Pepper Lonely Hearts Club Band is based upon this premise. We might be the Beatles, we might be the biggest band in the world, but what would it be like if we weren't the Beatles? What would it be like if we were another type of band? A band that harkened back to a certain past that in America is represented by vaudeville, and in the United Kingdom it's represented by marching bands and music hall, but also very futuristic looking. They were pretending to be another band at that point. And so Sgt. Pepper, I think, exposes the cracks that they no longer really wanted to be the Beatles anymore. It's a 5-year jaunt. Now, when you look at the Police, a 5-year jaunt. If you look at Nirvana, a 5-year jaunt. Like the great bands, it's a 5-year jaunt. And maybe if they stopped after Sgt. Pepper, we wouldn't have got Abbey Road. But for me, those albums that come in after, which would be like Yellow Submarine soundtrack, would be the White Album, would be Let It Be and Abbey Road. They're different. And I've always wondered what it is. Now, this ties into an idea that I have. I'm a big rock music fan. And there's a certain aspect of rock music I love. And even bands I don't like have it. Right, even the punk bands and all sort of the new wave bands that I wasn't so keen on, they all have this thing. And what I would call it is rock music. Okay, this is there's hooks, there's an accessibility there, but there's also a groove. That groove's heavy, and there's sounds, and those sounds are heavy. These bands are heavy, right? And there is a jauntiness and there's a performance to it. Rock music's rock music. Rock and roll's something different. I call it rock and roll here, but we're really talking about rock music. Now, for me, rock music starts in 1967. And for me, I don't know if you have this is really where this is coming from. When I look at rock and roll, rock music, pop music, 1967 is the watershed year. When you go to 1966, you're fishing around. You go, my God, this is amazing. The Doors album's amazing. You know, it's like Revolver, Rubber Soul. That's amazing what they're doing there. Bob Dylan like a Rolling Stone. Because you know, before 67, rock music doesn't quite exist. All you could spot are the seeds of rock music. And 1967 has always been the year. The amount of bands I love that were formed and had success after 1967 are huge. But when I start to go to the bands before then, I feel like I'm not in my world anymore. As a rock guy, as a guy that plays the drums, rock and roll drums and into electric guitars and all the things I've been in all my life, there's a change in 1967. Now, I think, after much consideration, there's a number of things that changed the Beatles at that point, and I will get into them on this video. But I think overridingly it's Jimi Hendrix. So let's back up. Who the hell were the Beatles? Right, so America, the United States of America, invents popular music. They have all the different styles, whether it's jazz, blues, gospel, country, western, country and western, you know, all these things. And then they've got soul and all these different styles of music. Rock and roll, rhythm and blues. They've got all the styles. And throughout the 20th century, when people were buying a lot of records, it was either some sort of middle-of-the-road pap, like Pat Boone, or it was this darker music that came from American folk music. It's all American folk music in reality. That goes around the world. And as soon as people start recording American folk music, once the labels start doing that in the 1920s, it creates what we know as pop music. And it touches absolutely everything. It goes around the world. Now, you could say that it washed up on the shore of Liverpool, in the port of Liverpool, on the boats that the sailors would bring from the United States, and they'd have all these cool rhythm and blues records, you know, and if you're in Liverpool, you could get those records easy, and you could say that the young, you know, Beatles were listening to those records and they reacted to it. And there is a truth in that. But what's more important is skiffle. The United Kingdom had a jazz scene and a blues scene from the 1920s on. And it was a successful scene. By the time we get to the 1940s, we have the trad jazz boom. You know, if you go and listen to Humphrey Littleton's Bad Penny Blues, what you'll hear is not sort of bebop. You'll hear a sort of rolling, boogie-woogie sort of rhythm and blues, which basically the Beatles ripped off on the tune Lady Madonna. So they were aware of these because these artists like Chris Barber, Ken Collier were household names here in the United Kingdom. And they were exploring not so much modern jazz, but they were going back. And Chris Barber in the late 40s, early 50s decided he wanted a bit in his set where he would explore the sort of folk music that had merged through geniuses like Leadbelly. And he started to do Leadbelly songs, and this created almost like a punk-like boom in the United Kingdom. It was called skiffle. And skiffle was great because the tunes were relatively simple to play and they sounded really cool. People could bop along to them. Some of them are like, some of Lead Belly's tunes are like children's songs, so you can sing along. There's call and response. Everybody loves that. And you could form a band if you had a washboard and you had like an old acoustic guitar and maybe an old tea chest with a broom handle with a string on. You could build your own instruments. Now, this goes right back to the spasm bands of New Orleans in the late 1890s. I find this fascinating. So this sort of spasm band approach explodes in the United Kingdom. And in the mid-50s, before rock and roll's really had any sort of power, sort of 54, 55, loads of kids are getting turned on to skiffle. That's why there's that famous film of Jimmy Page, with his skiffle bang in the late 50s, nice well-spoken posh boy, stood there going, yes, I really like skiffle, What do they say when I can't remember. I'll put the clip up, actually, because I love it when they say, what do you want to do when you grow up? Do you want to be a musician? And he goes, no, I don't. And then he says something that does sound vaguely like what Led Zeppelin got up to when they were in Led Zeppelin, but I can't remember what it is. Here it is. Anyway, that's that little bit of humour for you. Right. The Who, Jeff Beck, the Beatles, numerous musicians were playing skiffle. Muddy Waters came over around about 1960, did a tour of the UK. They were all shocked, all the sort of folky types are shocked because he had an electric guitar plugged into an amp. Then Larry Parnes put on the famous sort of rock and roll tours throughout the United Kingdom with American stars like Eddie Cochran and Gene Vincent. The Beatles were sat at all those shows. I know this because my father-in-law also sang on those shows, a singer called Peter Wynn. That's my wife's dad. I've just explained to you what a father-in-law is in case you don't know. Pete sadly died a couple of years ago, but when he was around, I used to pick his brain about that tour. Because he was there, actually, he was trying to get a car to get out of Bristol after their Bristol show, and he'd found a car, and then Gene Vincent came out, and Gene Vincent never got on with my father-in-law, and he says, you're not having that car, we're having that car, and he jumped into that car, bundled in Eddie Cochran and I think some girl, and a few miles down the road it killed Eddie Cochran. My father-in-law was there for that, but he told me that after one of the shows a band came up to him known as the Silver Beatles and said, we've got a tour of Scotland, do you want to do that tour singing for us? And he turned around and said, no, you're not good enough. Because at that time, Pete had the cream of the United Kingdom's session scene. He got Georgie Fame on keyboards, Brian Bennett or Clem Catini on drums, Licorice Locking on bass, Big Jim Sullivan on guitar. That was his band. And he wasn't going to slum it round Scotland with this sort of Liverpudlian band that weren't that good in his eyes. That's key to this, you see. Johnny Gentle, who was also on the tour, he was quite happy to go and do it. And that tour has become legendary. Johnny Gentle is probably most famous now for singing for the Beatles for a tour of Scotland. Did you know all this? Is this all interesting to you? The Beatles weren't that great. They weren't that competent. When they got signed, they had something going on. But to say that they were like the bands that backed up Little Richard or Chuck Berry or Buddy Holly, or any of those bands, or Elvis Presley, those guys are insane. Our British bands weren't. They'd come out of skiffle. They were incompetent. Now, we all know a band is as good as their drummer, so they rock up into the studio. And George Martin, they get George Martin, and he's like, oh, no, we need to get somebody else. Now, good for George Martin. He didn't just then go and get, Brian Bennett in and get him to play on it. He asked them to find another drummer, and they found Ringo Starr, who at that point was probably the most competent musician of all four of them. He had a really good gig with it. Was it Rory Storm? So the Beatles go into the studio, and at that point, when you had a deal, you went in and you recorded your album. They do their debut album in one go. It's got loads of cover versions on it. They're basically aping rhythm and blues, but there's an edge to it. And that edge, which should have been incompetence, right, actually was magical. And I'm going to explain what it was. Firstly, the Americans produced artists like Little Richard, Chuck Berry, and then Elvis Presley. And all of these artists were like superstars. Now, Buddy Holly was important because he wasn't. Buddy Holly, as well as being a great singer and a great songwriter with an incredible band, also looked like the normal type of bloke, right? And I think that was the attraction. As the youth went into the 1960s, I don't think they wanted to worship an Elvis Presley, who had then let them down. He'd gone off and done a whole bunch of crappy films. And that new generation are like, we want something else. I want to look at somebody like me. When the Beatles rock up in the United States and go on the Ed Sullivan Show, what people saw was a really good rocking band. They were tight. You know, once Ringo was in there, they were tight. All these lovely vocal harmonies, catchy pop songs, but they all looked like regular guys. You know, Ringo Starr was not only great because he was a great drummer, and I do believe he was a great drummer with an incredible feel. I wish I had Ringo's feel. God, do I wish I had Ringo's feel. But he was also an ugly bastard. And I think when he sat there, really high up on his drums at the back, doing his head, ugly blokes everywhere went, oh my God, are the girls into this band? They're screaming. Oh, there's look for me. All I've got to do is get and join a band. This is where it all starts. The cheekiness, the regular guys, when they were interviewed, they were funny, right? It's funny because come to the studio this morning, there was this lady outside and she blocked me in a little bit and she went, I hope I'm not blocking you in. And we started chatting. She was so funny. And I said, where are you from? Because I thought she had a Liverpudlian accent. She was from Liverpool. And we were just laughing. I didn't even met her. We were just laughing our heads off. She said all these cheeky things. That's what they're like, right? The Liverpudlians are cheeky and they're also hard. And they're all a bunch of rob dogs. But anyway, that's not the case. You know, they were hard. Everyone thinks the Rolling Stones had edge. No, these were the Beatles. If there was a fight between the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, the Beatles would win. So they've got all that, right? That's their edge, is that they're just working class lads, proper working class lads. And that becomes a very important thing in rock and roll. But there's another thing. Us British, especially if you've been brought up in the 1940s post-war England, the music we were surrounded by was music hall, was the music that was in sort of George Formby films. It was cheeky chappy music. It was funny, right? The greatest British song of all time. You want to know what it is? What the greatest British song ever written is that embodies everything that's great about my country? It's The Laughing Policeman. The Laughing Policeman is genius, right? Nobody can be unhappy if they're listening to The Laughing Policeman. This is just genius. That's the hook, right? The Americans have an equivalent tune, actually, which I think defines America better than any other tunes. And that's that, you know, Bird is a Word song. That is what these things embody rock and roll. They might seem like novelties, but they're incredibly powerful. And the Beatles had that. They had that in their DNA, right? Now, when you listen to The Laughing Policeman is the embodiment of what I call the English aesthetic. And what's that? It's a way of not being over the top. It's a way of not expounding about things. It's about being cool and deflating the powers that be, not through deep arguments or hysterical shouting. You displace the power of the privileged elite through making them look stupid. J.K. Rowling does this in Harry Potter when the boggart comes out of the wardrobe. And you take away the power of the boggart by imagining them in a funny thing. You know, many British people will say, oh, you've got to do some public speaking again, I'm ever so nervous. Why don't you imagine them on the toilet? That is a very British thing. We are very orderly. We can queue. And I think that the ability to queue is a sign of a healthy civilization, right? I know I'm going to get in the neck for that, but I do believe that. It shows that you have a set of underlying morals and rules where you are going to negotiate with everybody else for the stuff that's there. the Q is the British version of communism, right? And we just do it without thinking. But authority figures, whether it be the politicians, whether it be the police, whether it be royalty, whether it be the clergy, we stick a pin in them, not with some great overarching critique, some ideology, by deflating them, but not in a way that's hateful. When you hear the laughing policeman, you imagine a policeman who's a little bit fat, a little bit incompetent, but a nice guy, full of joy. Bumbling would be the word. And in that, we deflate authority. And people love authority to be deflated. And I think it was that aspect of the Beatles that went around the world. Nobody's ever really said this, I think, except for me, but I really believe that was the quality they had. And that was with something else that the British have. And it is our surrealist sense of humour. Not just a sense of humour, but a strange sense of humour, right? Which is hard to describe. It's almost mystical, this sense of humour is. I hope I bring it to this channel. You know, I think I do. I'm quite proud of what I've done, actually, in terms of bringing comedy to music YouTube. I would say that I am perhaps the reason why I am the greatest music YouTuber. The reason why I'm the greatest music YouTuber is because even though I draw from a rich philosophical background, an informed and knowledgeable approach to music, but I also bring a certain refined late middle age look, you know, which brings the ladies in, some sort of, and also with my humour, I can balance what may seem like arrogance, but it is just reality, me stating the truth. I can deflate that with my humour. And that special mix the Beatles had, and I have to say, I have too, you know. And I don't want to put myself in the same bracket as the Beatles, but I have done. What I just did then was deflated that type of pomposity. I do it all the time on this channel. Do I think I'm the greatest music YouTuber? Well, of course I do. You see, I can't help but do it. You'll never get me out of it because I'm British. And the Americans go, is he telling the truth or not? And some people go, it's really funny, you're funny. And then other blokes go, and he's not funny at all. He's just arrogant and opinionated. And I feel like, yeah, that's rooted them out. Twats. And that what I've just done is done this sort of pompous talk like this, where you hold your collar and you're like a 1930s politician and you do that thing. And then I've just used a bit of sort of bad language just to show that I am really an oik. The Beatles had all this. That is the English aesthetic. It's not about imperialism or colonialism or the royal family going round and trotting along on their horses and showing many cannons they've got. That's not the English aesthetic. It's this. It's in Monty Python. It's in George Formby. It's in Shakespeare. It's in the paintings of Turner. It's in the music of Vaughan Williams. It's a love of the aesthetic of this country, which is embodied in the patchwork quilts of our, you know, countryside, which isn't like nature. It's a beautiful balance between humanity, industry, and nature. And what those little patchwork quilts of fields full of lovely English crops hide is that little bustle in the hedgerow. Don't be alarmed now. It's just a spring clean for the May Queen. This is the English aesthetic. That Robert Plant can sing that and get away with it. The May Queen. What the hell's the May Queen? So, that's what the Beatles have. And this, combined with an incredible ringmaster of the absurd, which was George Martin. George Martin wasn't just a genius in the studio. He'd spent his time producing the Goons and Peter Sellers, right? He knew how to go beyond just recording a band or an orchestra. He could integrate spoken word. He could cut together all sorts of different stuff. If you listen to his production, and I have these albums, and I might do a video just on the 2 albums I've got produced by George Martin. I've got 2 Peter Sellers albums, the greatest being Song for Swinging Sellers. Now, you may marvel at what Brian Wilson did or the Beatles did in 1967, but put that out on, and the stuff that is going on is incredible. How George Martin pulled it off, I do not know. Right, there's whole scenarios. 1 minute we're in a city, 1 minute in the countryside, there's a monologue, and then there's an orchestra playing, then there's a big band playing, and sometimes these morph into sort of Indian classical groups. It's incredible. George Martin had that there, and the lads loved it. They were like they're kids at the toy shop, and they didn't want to tour. What was the point in touring? They would hear what they would say, doing and singing anyway. What was the point? So they go into the studio, and they can do whatever they want at this point. And I believe, in terms of the technique and approach, they lay the groundwork. But there's something missing. There's something missing from the Beatles, but they don't know it. They don't know it. In 65, 66, Eric Clapton rocks up into a session with John Mayall. And he's not like the Beatles. He knows the Beatles. He's mates with them. They know Clapton. They know he's a virtuoso blues player. He studied Chicago blues inside out. But he's not just doing a copy of Chicago blues. He brings his amp in, he turns it all the way up, and he overdrives it. And by overdriving it, he compresses the signal of the guitar, thus drawing out the notes. So the guitar, which is a plucked instrument, which means it has a sharp attack and a short decay, turns into a more horn-like, and he can play these long lines. Now, why does he want to play these long lines? Because he's also taken a leaf out of John Coltrane's Boots book. So he's in there doing all this wailing, improvising. It's sort of half Chicago blues, it's also half a free jazz, and it's in there. And then he forms Cream. 1966, Cream is formed. And then, like an alien from another world, Hendrix rocks up. Now, you could argue that he, coming from the Chitlin circuit, playing with Little Richard, playing with Sam and Dave, playing with, Don Covey or whoever it was, I can't remember, and learning how to do that T-Bone Walker thing, that Chuck Berry thing, playing the guitar behind his neck, making love to it, sticking, all that sort of stuff, playing it with his teeth, all that type of thing. That's pure Chitlin circuit. That's how you entertain people in America, and you have to be amazing at it. And we don't have a tradition of that. What we have in the United Kingdom is silly walks. Do you want to see a silly walk? Yeah, do you want to see another silly walk? Yeah, that's what we have. And I'm afraid that's what Mick Jagger does, really. Beatles didn't have any silly walks. What they had was absurdist humour. Suddenly, in London, we've got Hendrix turning up. But he's like a bloody... He soaks it all in. I'm sure he took his lead from... not his literal lead. He didn't like Nick Eric Clapton's guitar lead. But I'm sure he was inspired by Cream. In 1966, like this is a year before the Watershed year, he gets his deal and he goes into the studio and he records Hey Joe. Now, Hey Joe is an obvious choice. It's this folk song has been knocking around for ages. It's coming out of that sort of coffee house folk scene that produced Pete Seeger, Phil Ox, and then Bob Dylan. It goes into sort of the perennial sort of American history of the sort of outlaw, the Stagger Lee. It's got all of that. It's a great choice. But for me, what Hendrix does with it is incredible, right? He's got that whole Cream thing going on. but he's got something else going on Hey Joe. And the bit where he goes, you know, that is incredible. But he also records in that session, that first session, another tune called Stone Free. Now, Stone Free doesn't sound like anything. It just doesn't. It's like Stone Free. I don't know how to explain how it comes about. I know it's got a little bit of sort of a boogaloo beat on it, you know. But when I listen to it, I go like, all this stuff before this is cool. Beach Boys, the Beatles, it's all cool. But it hasn't got this. I mean, there's a soul thing there. James Brown's sort of doing it. Not in 1966. Cold Sweat's when he changes. Stone Free's unbelievable. Stone Free never got on the debut album. This is mind-blowing. But by the time the album comes out, he's recorded Purple Haze. I think Purple Haze was recorded perhaps the end of 1966, early 67. Purple Haze has got the flat 5 in. It's got the guitar hook in it. It's got the riffs in it. It's got that great big Hendrix chord. It's got that big angular. I can't explain how incredible this is. And the Beatles must have thought, oh, we're top dogs, you know, we're doing all our cheeky, chappy songs, Yellow Submarine. We did Tomorrow Never Knows with the Tibetan Book of the Dead. We had all these backward words. And, you know, we're something else. And everyone thinks we're the best, you know. Oh, this is bloke Jimi Hendrix. What's he doing? On and on and on and on and bow down 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 Mitch Mitchell down 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 down. This is amazing. When's the singing going to start? What's going to happen? Boom, bang, boom, boom, bang. I take a bubble haze all in my brain. Maybe things don't seem the same. No, they're not the same, Jimmy, are they? They're not the same. And the Beatles must just be going, can we do this? No. I mean, we could probably do it in the studio with multi-tracking, couldn't we? You could do Helter Skelter. Shall we have a go? You know, we could do it. Yeah, but what? Jimmy sounds like what we do, either multi-tracking and all the wizardry that George does. George Martin, that is. He seems to just do it on that guitar. Hendrix isn't just a blues guitarist. Now, what's interesting is that the month, I think it's May 67, when their first album comes out, Are You Experienced, the Beatles bring out Sgt. Pepper. Now, Sgt. Pepper is a masterpiece, and it is a statement, but like I said, it's conceptually, it's not really a Beatles album. It's them pretending to be another band. So the cracks are starting to show. The fact that in the same month, Are You Experienced came out. Now, I had this idea last week. I've been thinking about this for ages. I thought, Andy, there's one thing you haven't done in all this that you need to do. You need to sit down and put the headphones on and listen to Are You Experienced, something that I haven't really done. Now, the reason for this is because in the 1980s, when I got into Jimi Hendrix, there was loads of low-priced compilation albums. I bought hundreds of them. So I had a bunch of albums that would have a bit from the first album, a bit from the second album. And that's how I got to know. I never listened to it in sequence. I've never really done that with Hendrix's albums. I have just gone and ordered all the albums, and I am actually going to listen to them in sequence, because I think whereas Zeppelin or Genesis or the Mavic Structure, that's how I listen to them. I'd buy an album, listen to it all the way through, buy next album, and I would often, once I got into that band, then just work my way through chronologically. That's the sort of anal retentive type I am. But with Hendrix, it never really happened. The only album I ever got at that point was Axis Boulder's Love, which I absolutely loved. And if you to push me, go, what's your favourite Hendrix album? It could be Axis Boulder Love. It could be Band of Gypsies. I had Band of Gypsies. I never had Electric Ladyland, and I never had Are You Experienced. So I put it on the other day, put the headphones on. Now, to say it's a great album is an understatement, right? It is a great album. It is a groundbreaking album, right? It is unbelievable in the statement that Hendrix makes. He has completely changed the game in every single way. In every single way. As has Mitch Mitchell. Mitch Mitchell's drumming on it in 1966 is better than anybody. That's the bottom line. Right? Who else is drumming like that in 66, 67? Who? Who's drumming like that? He sounds like Tony Williams. It's like Elvin Jones. And it really is like that. And somehow they've been able to negotiate through the power trio a way of him playing like that. Ginger Baker was doing that to some extent, but I don't feel that Ginger has the fluidity and just wild abandon of Mitch Mitchell. Is Mitch Mitchell the most underrated drummer in history? Is there an argument that Mitch Mitchell is the greatest rock drummer in history? And he's not a rock drummer. The amount of drummers from the 1970s that I've spoken to, like say for Narada Michael Walden, my hero, his hero was Mitch Mitchell. Mitch is incredible. Noel Redding does an incredible job of holding it down. I did a video once where I had a go at Noel Redding. It was a bit mean, really. Noel Redding's like a folk guitarist. He's busking on bass. He could do good backing vocals. He looked really cool. He got an afro. They all had to have an afro. But his ability to just hold it down, and some of his bass playing is a lot more exploratory than I made out. The Jimi Hendrix Experience are an incredible band. But when I put the album on, I thought, I have never come across an album which is so groundbreaking, but not only is it groundbreaking, that virtually every tune on it is not only famous, but has actually embedded itself into the cultural DNA of rock. And in some cases, tunes like Hey Joe, Purple Haze, have actually embedded themselves into mainstream culture. Every tune on there is mind-blowing. And he keeps hitting it. He keeps hitting it, whether it's Purple Haze, whether it's Foxy Lady, whether it's Are You Experienced, whether it's the invention of jazz rock fusion. I've sat here going, oh, who invented jazz rock fusion? Could it be this? Could it? The Americans were trying. No, it's Third Stone from the Sun. Manic Depression is heavy metal embodied, right? And every time he hits the guitar, every solo, it's the greatest guitar. No one can touch it. There's just nobody can touch this album. Nobody can touch it. Are You Experienced? When you actually sit down and listen to it, put the headphones on as well. 1967. You put the headphones on and listen to what's going on that album. You feel like these guys just walked in and sound like that. It's incredible. I can't tell you how blown away I was. The great Dominic Miller, who plays guitar for Sting, he's a friend of the channel now, and I'm very honoured that he's a mate. You know, he texts me, and we have chats. So while I was listening to this, he texted me, and I said, Dominic, I'm listening to Are You Experienced? I said, is this the greatest album ever made? He went, well, yeah. He said, it's definitely the greatest guitar album ever made. Yeah, it's also the greatest. I haven't thought about that, yeah. It's the greatest guitar album ever made, isn't it? It's the greatest album ever made. I am exploring the idea of the greatest album again. I'm going back to it because I didn't quite. It's so those tunes are so. Hey Joe, Manic Depression, Third Stone from the Sun. You know, Foxy Lady, Purple Haze. What else is on that album? Are You Experienced? There's one tune on there which is incredible. I can't remember the title of it. I wasn't going to do this video because I hadn't got a track list. I haven't got the album with me. But I thought, no, you're ready to go because I'm feeding off the experience of putting it on. And not just going, oh, this is really good for the time. All this, they were really, it was not like that. It's just better than anything else. It's just incredible. This morning I woke up, put Facebook on, and there's a video of Stevie Ray Vaughan playing Third Stone from the Sun. Well, I've got to watch this. Now, Stevie Ray Vaughan is a Texas bass guitar player that was steeped in Americana and the blues. He knew it inside out. And God, he could play the guitar. One of my favourite guitarists. I love Stevie Ray Vaughan. You know, when I criticise jazz, what I'm criticising is there's not enough of what Stevie Ray Vaughan's got in the music anymore. Does that make sense? That's the only way I could. I probably described on that one statement what I've been trying to say over video after video. Why? Because I'm talking about Jimi Hendrix. That's why. Because this is it. We're right in it. This video, we're right in it now. We're right in what it is. This is what we love. This is right here. No, I don't like Jimi Hendrix. I'm more into the 80s guitars like Joe Satriani. Oh, shut up. Bloody hell. Jimmy's so great that the bloody creative state we are in at the moment, it means that Jimmy is actually losing his grip on that cultural history. People would rather hand it to Queen, and I love Queen. But they want to say, oh, Queen, put him in the top 10 greatest bands. Put him at number 4, Queen. There'd be no Queen without Jimmy. There'd be no nobody. There'd be no me. There'd be no. How can I get across? I didn't think this video would end up like this. Anyway, put Facebook on. Steve Ray Vaughan's on there, and he's doing Third Stone for the Sun. And I watch it, and it's incredible. But all he's doing is making avant-garde noise for the whole time. The whole time. It's like Ascension or Interstellar Space, you know, or Free Jazz by Ornette Coleman. It's like, it's avant-garde. And yet, Jimi Hendrix was so great that it allows Stevie Ray Vaughan to sit there, basically throwing his guitar around the stage, banging it, tapping it, scratching it, up high volume with his feedback notes coming out. And I thought, what Hendrix did to our culture is unbelievable. He embedded the primal scream. He embedded what Albert Ayler was trying to get across. He not only did that, but he drenched it in the blues, which has this deep scream. Deep scream. And it's a scream not just of black Americans, of slaves. It's the street scream that we all have. That's why it goes around the world, because we all know that. And then what I haven't said is, imagine all this is going on. So Jimmy comes out with this new album. It's just the best album ever made. It totally is going to change everything forever. And so you hear about this, so you go down, and what do you see? You see this guy that looks like he's on the roller coaster ride of life. He looks like an explosion. It's like you've got Elvis Presley and injected him with like these Mount Olympus gods, and he's exploded out. Like you're seeing the aura as well as the man. And he stands on stage and he wants to blow you away in a way no other musician has ever done it. He wants to, let Little Richard explain it. I'm trying my best. I thought I was doing a good job, but that is it. What Little Richard describes, that he knows. Right? So, the Beatles see this, and they must have loved Jimmy, and they must have had so much respect for him. And it goes the other way. What's interesting when you listen to those live shows in 1967, that Jimi Hendrix is out playing as a cover version Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. You know that tune that they had to assemble in the studio, and it's got all these things, a rumpy-tumpy bits and bit there, all that bit where George Martin stitched all this incredible like film for your ears, and you listen to Sgt. Pepper. What does Jimmy do? He just has a Strat at high volume that's not staying in tune, and on that he can embody everything on that track. They must have thought, what is this? And I think, what happened? What's the psychological effects of that when that happens? It's not jealousy. What it is, and I think all us musicians go through this, what it is the realization that your time has come and gone. There's a track by Rush called Losing It on the Signals album. That always interested me, that track did. When I was a little kid and I heard that, I thought, yeah, Rush have got really old now. They're really old, and that's why Neil Peart, he's exploring being really old, because he was 30. But artists have a period where, if they're great, what they're doing is so vital. And the Beatles, their time had come. Of course, in 1967, Brian Epstein died. And without that guy, their manager, steering them, it starts to fall apart and shatter. I think the only guy that really wanted to keep going was Paul McCartney. And he kept them going. But that's the cracks that start to show. But whether they knew it or not, their time had passed. And we were heralding a new era for music. And what I talk about on this channel, what I talk about here are the heavy rock bands, the classic rock bands. I talk about jazz rock fusion, psychedelic music, avant-garde music, and of course prog. They are all birthed in that moment in 1967 with that album, Are You Experienced? Jimmy's the greatest there ever was in terms of rock music, right? He's the defining man. And he's like a superstar that's shooting across the cultural landscape. I am forever astonished how many gigs he did, how many television or film performances he did, how many tracks he recorded, and how many incredible stories he was able to pull together in a matter of 3 to 4 years. My mentor is a guy called Kevin Gammond, and Kev's on my mind at the moment. Kevin, I met Kevin when I was in my early 20s. Kevin had played with everybody. When he was 15 years old, he'd played with Jimmy Cliff, touring around London, and then he got the gig with Tim Rose, who was the guy that made Hey Joe famous. And he famously toured with Tim Rose, with John Bonham on drums, with Jimi Hendrix. And when he was on that tour, he chummed up with Jimmy. And of course, Kevin told me all these stories. Now, he's met everybody, but he always came back to that meeting with Jimmy. Because I think Jimmy, for him, was bringing in this other thing. And he did a lot of saying, oh, Kevin, you need to listen to this record. You got to listen to this record. There was a lot of that. Kev then he was in the band of Joy with Rob Platt and John Bonham. They left that, formed Bronco, and he had a career in music. Now Kev's not very well at the moment, and I'm sending my love, and I think I'm right to send my love to Kev when I'm talking about what I'm trying to talk about on this video, which is what Jimmy did in 1967. Everything comes together. If I was to say that the Jimi Hendrix Experience was the greatest band of all time, would I be right or wrong? If I was to say that Are You Experience is the greatest album of all time, it's the greatest debut album of all time, it's the most innovative and groundbreaking album of all time, and it's perhaps the album that has the most, not hit records necessarily, but the most great, profound, sublime recordings on it of any album that's ever existed. When I looked down the list, and there was a couple of tracks I wasn't so aware of, I put them on, and I did know them, but when I heard them, I was like, God, this is amazing. This is amazing. So, my statement that the Beatles were ruined by Jimi Hendrix is a bit clickbaity. But it's enabled me to tell a story and to describe that moment when rock and roll and pop music turns into rock music. And it happened in May 1967 with the release of Are You Experienced? Before that, we are looking at the Seeds. But it burst forth then. And at that point, the Beatles were They were not as important as they were. And I think what that created in the Beatles, overwhelmingly, was they were no longer a band. They were a group of individuals. And they no longer wanted to work together in the way they were before. I think that perhaps what Jimmy did to the Beatles was make them look into themselves and go, I really want to do this. And so George Harrison, who wants to go off into the spiritual realm and, be at one with himself, is opposed to Paul McCartney, who wants to write cheeky pop songs, and John Lennon, who wants to go back to his rock and roll roots. And they try and do that. Let It Be is them trying to get back to their rock and roll roots. Let It Be is them trying to find the band that was once there. Perhaps what changed was the Beach Boys and the Beatles and maybe even Frank Zappa, all these people that had discovered the studio and the technology of the studio and created the idea of the album. Their muse existed in the recording studio. And what Hendrix did is he took that aesthetic, he took the psychedelic sounds that had been created. Remember, everyone's dropping LSD and getting off their stone and all that type of thing. And they could go and listen to Pink Floyd or Sgt. Pepper because it's blowing them away. Well, like this. What Jimmy does is he takes that and he embodies this into the power trio. Now, the power trio really has its roots in Cream. Is there any band before them we can point to? There may be bands that have guitar, bass and drums with one of them singing. But the dynamics of the power trio, the freedom, the expression, the unit, the sort of almost like psychic unit. Cream did it, but Hendrix really did it. Cream don't last. By 1968, they're gone. Ginger's off with his horses and his African percussion. Jack Bruce is obviously going more towards jazz rock fusion. And, Eric Clapton's going towards heroin addiction and writing middle-of-the-road songs. Hendrix almost hands the baton to your Led Zeppelins, your Black Sabbaths and the Deep Purples. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, we can say Black Sabbath are incredible because they invent heavy metal, don't they? They invent heavy metal with that first track on their debut album, Black Sabbath, because it's dark and heavy and menacing. Why? Because they used that flat five. But Hendrix had already done it with Purple Haze. So, that is the end of my video. I don't feel like I've done him justice, and I've tried really hard to. Maybe in the edit I can put a few things in that might just elevate this up to me basically stating the fact that the GOAT, the greatest of all time when it comes to rock and roll and rock music, of any of it, was Jimmy.